and welcome to We'll Tell You What We're Reading, our monthly YouTube show where we tell you what we're reading. We are back to you again, not live again, but recording live, so still anything can happen. Maybe just not as much fun, but the pressure is still there. I am joined, as usual, by my colleagues, Greg Carter, Liz Rior, Amber Harvey, and Louise Goldstein. We hope everyone is having a very staying warm and safe, and had a happy holiday for those of you who did celebrate. And we hope you saw our recording from last month. You can watch all of our previous shows on YouTube. We also would like you to join our book club discussions. Our next one is actually this Saturday. Amber is going to lead a discussion on Nothing to See Here. You can also join us next Monday if you like this YouTube show to tell us what you're reading. And then Greg will be leading a discussion on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis on December 13th. And then I will be leading a discussion on Wednesday, December 15th on Darius the Great is Not Okay. We are still in the process of planning our January book clubs. We haven't quite done that yet. And we may or may not be resuming some in-person book clubs, so stay tuned for that. That is still a little up in the air, but we are hoping to resume some of those. But without further ado, we're going to get this show on the road here, and Greg is going to lead us off and share the books that he is reading.
Hello, everyone. So as Laura was so nice to introduce me, my name's Greg. And I read 3 books for this session. So let's get started. Right, here we go. And now, all right, so being head of the science fiction and fantasy book club, it's only fitting that I read the book for the science fiction and fantasy book club last month, and that was The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. For those of you who don't know what the premise is, takes place in like the 19th century. In Victorian London, and it is narrated by a gentleman who went to his friend's house, who's the unnamed time traveler, and the time traveler pretty much tells his whole core group of friends his experiences with time travel and how he went into the future and encountered what became of humanity. I don't want to give too much away because it's such a short story, but suffice to say, it asks a lot of questions, namely pertaining to whether or not humanity is on its way to going towards a utopia, because at that time, people were kind of thinking that progress was just going to be going straight, just up and up for our human civilization. And H.G. Wells kind of throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into that, asking is that the case? Does time repeat itself? Does time go into a totally new direction? Can evolution actually be shaped by human society? And he just asks a lot of really fascinating and interesting questions. And some of them are really cool. Some of the prospects are kind of terrifying. And all in all, I always kind of knew a little bit about the story going into it, but I hadn't actually read it because time travel isn't really one of my favorite types of genre, but I was really pleasantly surprised by this book. H.G. Wells there's a lot of great writers from the past where you listen to a lot of their works upon further reflection, you're like, that did not age well. But fittingly enough, H.G. Wells and time travel, it actually holds up quite considerably. I think that, and there's some outdated stuff there, but most of it raises some really, fascinating and interesting questions that still resonate to the present day. So if you haven't read it, I would definitely give it a read. It's very short, it's very interesting, and it's very easy to get into. Next up, Murder on the Orient Express So for those of you, by Agatha Christie. So for those of you who know me, I'm a big horror nerd, but we're getting around that time of the year where I have to, give it up. Otherwise, I'm going to drive my family crazy. So my wife, Margaret, suggested that I do something that's called Noir November, where I still get a little bit of the spooky factor and a good mystery, but, I'm not driving anybody nuts with like slasher things. So Murder on the Orient Express, for those of you who don't know it, it's about the detective Hercule Poirot, who, Shakespeare, not Shakespeare, Sherlock Holmes is is often hailed as being like the most famous detective, probably, but I would say Hercule is like a very close second. And there's so many books. He's in many of Agatha Christie's books and movies, and this is probably the most famous. Long story short, Hercule is on a train that's the Orient Express, and it travels throughout Europe, and he's just really in there for just like kind of a nice vacation. He knows some of the people who help run it, and he's just going to have a nice time. But then he gets stuck. He and the rest of the crew get stuck, and there's a murder, and somebody has ended up dead. And, it's very much a question of who done it and why they did it, and what would be the consequences of revealing the culprit in this particular time, and can they do it before the train gets to their to their actual destination. Again, don't want to reveal too much, namely because this is a mystery, and it's one of those it's one of those mystery books that if you don't know what the ending is, you really should like read it just completely blind, because it's just going to be that much more fun. But I think that Christie is, there's a reason she's hailed as one of the greatest mystery novelists. She's really good at her craft. There's a lot of intertwining webs and connections between the murderer, and the victim, and it's just I really, really enjoyed it. So I would suggest giving it a read. All right, last, well, and definitely least, is Robert Jordan's The Eye of the World. So for those of you who, yeah, I know, this is a little bitter. So those of you who don't know, there is a book series by Robert Jordan called The Wheel of Time. It's an epic fantasy novel that dated back in the 90s, and it's currently right now premiering on Amazon Prime. I think there's about 4 episodes there, and I watched them and I enjoyed them. So I figured I'd give the book a try. And the whole premise is this: it's your average, like, there's a local farm boy. He finds out that he's the chosen one, possibly, to stop the Dark Lord from rising up and taking over the world again. So that's a lot of baggage to deal with. But in Robert Jordan's premise, and I admit this is a really interesting premise, he's the chosen one. He's kind of like the reincarnated version of the last hero who stopped the Dark One. But apparently, right when the Dark Lord got defeated and sealed away in his prison, he sucker punched the original hero, and the original hero went insane and pretty much broke the world. So the good guys are kind of in 2 camps on this particular individual, Rand or one of his friends. Because on one hand, yeah, he might be the one to save the world. On the other hand, he might be even worse. So what do you do when you're like simultaneously the hero and the villain of your own story? So I really like all those tropes, and it's kind of a cool premise. So I decided I would go in to read it. Unfortunately, I really do not like Robert Jordan's writing style. I just think it's a little, and again, if anybody likes it, totally get it. There's a lot of potential and cool stuff here, but I just think it's very drawn out. It's I tried to read, I read this for about 3 hours and then I had to put it down because the audiobook is about 25 hours long and there's 14 of these books. And it's a lot. And I love fantasy, but there's a lot of other books out there. And it's just, if you can't grip me in 3 hours, I feel like that's a fair thing. Also, personally for me, I think it takes a lot from the Lord of the Rings. I don't think, and I'm not saying it's like ripping off the Lord of the Rings, but there's so many similarities that I just kind of wish that it was a little bit more creative. Again, 14 books, so I have no doubt that they go into that creative process, but it's just it's just so long. In any case, that's I guess we haven't ended it on a high note for me, but that's my 3 books. So thank you so much, Laura.
And Liz, you're up next.
All right. Hi, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. Greetings from the past. Let me share my screen. Okay, so I have 3 graphic novels that I'm going to talk about today. So the first one, which you should see on your screen, is Department of Truth, Volume 1, The End of the World by James Tynion IV and Martin Simmons. So Department of Truth is a graphic novel series that asks the question, what if conspiracy theories could be made into reality when enough people believe in them? Which is just like a horrifying thought. That's what this graphic novel series explores. Special Agent Cole Turner has spent his professional life studying conspiracy theorists, infiltrating their ranks, trying to understand where the thoughts come from, etc. When he is seemingly shown a wall of ice at the end of the earth, which is flat, by the way, because it's a conspiracy theory graphic novel, he is thrust into the arms of the Department of Truth. So he infiltrates this flat earth conference, and one of the people there is like, yeah, I'll show you the end of the earth, hop in my plane. And then he sees like, oh yeah, the earth is flat, it ends. But is it really? No, it's a manifestation because enough people believe it. So the Department of Truth is the federal organization responsible for making sure conspiracy theories don't manifest in reality, because that could be panic and havoc everywhere. And Cole's new boss is the one and only Lee Harvey Oswald. For those who are unaware, that is the man who assassinated JFK, but there are conspiracy theories that would suggest otherwise. So his boss is Lee Harvey Oswald, but is it the real Lee Harvey Oswald? Is it just a manifestation of one of these conspiracy theory Lee Harvey Oswalds? And is any of this actually real? And like, who should Cole believe? It is all very confusing because belief creates reality in this series. I'd recommend this to anyone who likes mind-bending comics or conspiracy theory lore, or like alternate histories. I really enjoy it. I'm excited for volume 2. All right, my second book is Star Pig by Delilah S. Dawson and Francesco Gaston. So this is about, I don't know if you can see my little cursor, but this is Vess and this is Theo. And Theo is a tardigrade, and a tardigrade is a real thing. And here's a picture of one. Isn't it so cute? Look at its little hands. I love them. It's like a baked potato with paws. I don't know. Okay, Star Pig. It's the late 21st century and teenager Vess is headed to space camp, and it's actually in space. Theo is a mega tardigrade drifting through space looking for the home planet of his people. After Vess's shuttle gets attacked by an alien scavenger, Theo saves her life by swallowing her and protecting her inside his digestive system. Theo can expand and contract. That's one of his powers. He also can communicate psychically. So tardigrades are real creatures. They're in this actual world that you and I inhabit, but they're microscopic organisms that are practically indestructible. They can survive in space. They can survive without food or water. They can survive in fire. They're like nature's perfect survival machine that's smaller than you can actually see. So anyways, oh God, I just love their little hands. Vess and Theo quickly make first contact. So even though people are in space, they haven't met, other alien species, with multiple alien civilizations, all of whom are obsessed with Earth culture, because as it turns out, the Earth is a protected no contact planet, sort of like a galactic national park that nobody is allowed to enter to preserve the purity and culture and nature of our planet. So this is a really fun and silly space adventure that I would recommend for anyone 12 and over. And again, tardigrades are just so cute. And my last title is Berserker by Keanu Reeves, the Keanu Reeves, Matt Kint, Ron Garney, and Bill Crabtree. So Keanu Reeves can do no wrong in my mind, including this graphic novel. This is his comic writing debut, and it's a tale of an 80,000-year-old immortal, indestructible being, and it reads exactly like the Keanu Reeves movies we have all grown to love. So if you like The Matrix, John Wick, anything that involves Keanu running and punching, you're gonna like this. So yeah, he really exceeds at embodying like a lonely, highly / supernaturally skilled warrior who just wants a moment's peace, but can't get one. So in the story, B, the aforementioned immortal, has been recruited by the US government to take care of the jobs nobody else can, because they would die and he can't die. In exchange, government scientists agree to find a way for B to actually, finally, permanently die. And that's all he wants. He's like, I've been around for 80,000 years. I do not care. I want out. So this volume is an introduction to B's powers and backstory, and I'm looking forward to the next volume in the series. Warning, this has so much gore, so if viscera is not your jam, do not consider this guy. This is a move on to something else. But if you're into it, like this guy, 100% recommend, 10 out of 10. And those are my titles, and now I'm turning it over to Amber, I believe.
Thanks, Liz. I think we can agree to disagree on the cuteness of that creature. I think I'm going to have nightmares about it, but that's okay. I'm just kidding. I am going to be short and sweet today. I've got 3 books I'm going to talk about. The first one is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora and Neale Hurston. This had been on my to-read list for years, and I read it last month with the Saturday morning book group. It was originally published in 1937, and it's a story about a proud, independent Black woman, and it was initially dismissed by critics. It stayed out of print for nearly 30 years and was reissued in 1978 to wide acclaim. I was struggling with the dialogue, so I switched to the audio version that's performed by Ruby D, who is great. And listening did help, but I didn't love this book. Janie is hailed as an independent woman, and while she perhaps did live outside the norms of life in the late 1930s, I didn't actually think she was that independent. That said, the book group discussion was great, and ultimately, I'm glad that I read it. My second title is Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. And this is the book that we will be discussing on Saturday for the Saturday morning group this coming Saturday, or December 5th, I believe. Depending on when you're watching this, it might not be this Saturday. This book's a bizarre little treat, and in a tale as old as time, Jasper Robert, senator with presidential aspirations, leaves his first wife and children for a much younger Wade. He and his new wife have a child together, leaving his first family forgotten. So no choice but to bring the now 10-year-old twins to live with him on his Tennessee estate. The one real hiccup, the twins, Roland and Bessie, spontaneously catch on fire whenever they experience strong emotions. Obviously, the story about the twins cannot be made public, so Jab's wife, Madison, reaches out to a boarding school friend, Lillian, asking her to come and live on the estate and be the children's governess. So I'm a little embarrassed to admit that it took me about halfway through before I figured out that I think this is a political satire, and I can't wait to talk about it with the book discussion group on May. And I'm not going to say too much else. I don't want to give anything away, but. And my last title is The Storyteller by Dave Grohl. My great run with music bios continues, with this one taking this top spot for probably my favorite book of the year. As with my previous music bios, or the ones I've read recently, I listen to the audio, which Dave reads. There are no salacious details here, no gossip about Nirvana. And I think that's what I've liked best about this and all the recent autobiographies I've read. I'm all for hearing someone dish the dirt sometimes, but it's refreshing just to hear about the musician's life and his or her love of music. Dave's stories are funny and often very touching. He clearly adores his mother, his children, and his fans. One of the stories near the end of the book is about a time when he was on tour in Australia, and he realized that his two oldest daughters he was going to miss their daddy-daughter dance at their school. And he couldn't let that happen, but he also said he doesn't let down his fans. So I just wanted to say, Dave, if you're watching, I want to remind you about a time about 20 some years ago, 1999, 2000, I think it was, where I drove from Pittsburgh to Columbus, and it was the Foo Fighters and the Red Hot Chili Peppers double headlining. We got there early. I was so excited, and we were standing around by the tour buses, and your drummer came out and said, "Oh, we're not playing tonight. Dave's sick." Okay, super devastated, ruined the show for me. Then a few weeks later, my sister was watching MTV, and she saw that they had been in Columbus filming you on A Night on the Town, which is why you didn't go on the next day. So come back to your story about not letting your fans down. So I just want to say, if you want to make it up to me by playing another show with the Red Hot Chili Peppers sometime, that would be great. And that's all I have. And I think now my colleague Louise is going to talk.
Actually, it's me, but
sorry, Laura.
No, it's okay. Dave, if you're listening, you owe Amber a concert. That's great. So hello, I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, everyone. When I'm the host, sometimes weird stuff with Zoom happens. So we'll just do this. So you're going to see all my colleagues because the host. Anyway, so hello. So my first book is Republic of Detours: How the New Deal Paid Broke Writers to Rediscover America by Scott Brochard. It's the story of writers employed by the Federal Writers Project. That's part of the New Deal's Work Progress Administration, otherwise known as the WPA, in which several in the writing world during the Great Depression, including librarians, were put together to write guides through what we now refer to as the continental or lower 48 United States. Hawaii and Alaska were not officially states at that time. Brochard's narrative tells the story of these diverse writers and this program, which is very divisive and controversial. It still is today, actually. Led by Harry Hopkins, appointed project head Henry Alsberg, this project brought together writers such as Studs Terkel and, speaking of Their Eyes Are Watching God, and Zora Neale Hurston. This book is fascinating, telling basically about some of the different writers. It's also a warts and all narrative, which I always appreciate. One of the criticisms is that although there were several unemployed Black writers, only 2% of the writers involved in this project were Black. The Federal Writers Project, along with other creative WPA programs such as the Federal Theater Project, is actually something that's really captured my interest and imagination. And yet I feel I do not know enough at all about this, as I feel like it doesn't get a lot of attention, and I don't understand why. It's such a fascinating federal project. For those who want an introduction to WPA creative programs in general, I recommend the 1999 movie, it's a dramatization film, Cradle Will Rock. That provides more of an overview of the Federal Theater Project. That actually was the movie that introduced me to Cherry Jones, the actress, neither here nor there, but just an aside. For more on the Federal Writers Project specifically, which is what this book is about, I actually recommend the Smithsonian documentary Soul of a People, Writing America's Story. You can request the DVD from the Minuteman Library Network, or there's actually, Smithsonian has a book accompanying it, and you can get that through Hoopla. My second book is Jewish Cooking in America by Joan Nathan. Nathan is the author of several cookbooks about Jewish cooking and has co-founded the 9th Avenue Food Festival in New York. Like any cuisine, Jewish cooking is very varied, and I often like to explore cookbooks to compare it to some of the recipes that have been passed down from generation. Except for chicken soup, I will only make my grandma Alice's chicken soup because hers was the best, better than your grandmother's. Sorry, not sorry. And in this book, there are recipes for every circumstance and holiday. Last night, I made the crispy potato latkes for the first night of Hanukkah, and they came out very delicious, if I say so myself. Although now my copy of the cookbook smells like onions and vegetable oil, which is making me hungry since it's sitting in my office. There are also stories and anecdotes throughout the book, including the difference between lox and smoked salmon. Did you know there is one? I actually didn't until more recently than I'd like to admit, considering how much I love my Nova smoked salmon. But you can read all about it in this book. My last book is A Low Country Bride by Priscilla Williams. Maya is a talented bridal dress designer working for the prestigious Vera Wang-esque Laura Whitcomb in New York City. When her father has health issues, Maya makes a decision to take a leave of absence to be with him in her hometown of Charleston, South Carolina. There she crosses paths with Derek, a widower who has inherited his mother's bridal shop, Always a Bride. The two start a tentative friendship, then romance, as Derek deals with his distant teenage daughter and possibly losing the store due to financial issues. And Maya has to endure the pretty much the ignorance and just bossiness of her boss. While this book is light in many ways, there are definitely some very serious overtones. Maya has increasing symptoms from sickle cell anemia, and Derek's wife actually was killed in the real-life massacre at the Manuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in 2015 in Charleston. So it's giving the book some weight, which is not always seen in books in the romance genre, which I appreciated. I definitely highly recommend, even though the antagonist of that book is named Laura. But that's okay. So those are my books, and I'm now going to pass it to Louise.
Thank you, Laura. So interesting. Okay. Let's see. Can you guys see this? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. All right. I wanted to start with this book, The Beekeeper of Aleppo. To tell you the truth, I've been meaning to read this for a while. And the picture up in the upper left-hand corner is Syria. You can see some of the rubble because of the awful wars going on there. And then we've got a little bee on a flower. And Christie Lefteri, she's spent some time working in UNICEF camps in Greece for with Syrian refugees and other refugees. And she did a lot of due diligence putting this book together. Her parents were refugees from Cyprus, but she worked with a lot of people, interviewed a lot of people, got help from a Syrian refugee for details about Syria. And the book is beautifully, beautifully written. I do want to give a trigger warning because there is war, there are refugees, but what it does is it humanizes the refugees and some of the difficulties that they suffer. And it's so beautifully written. One technique she uses that I really, really like is she will have, the chapter is ending and then you don't see the last word, but then the last word is the beginning of the next chapter. And there's something so flowy about it. And she's kind of got the time flowing too, as it might for somebody who's been a refugee, who's had to, get into dangerous boat situations and not know if you're going to live from one place to the next, and people who've lost children from bombs and so on. And so the time is kind of flowing as it would with somebody who's kind of having memories, flashbacks to what came before. And our main characters are Nuri Ibrahim and his wife, Afra. They lost their son through a bomb blast, and Nuri, his wife Afra, who's a very talented artist, becomes blind, seemingly from the bomb, although later we'll learn more about that, about what and it's sort of about what you want to see, what you don't want to see, keeping love alive after difficult traumatic experiences. And the beekeeper part of this book, Nuri works with his friend Mustafa, and the description of the bees is absolutely gorgeous, beautifully written. There's even a scene where he's in a kind of like an inn or a place, a B&B, he calls it, where there's this bee who doesn't have wings, so she's kind of rejected by the colony, and he'll put the bee on his hand lovingly and refer to her as she. And then a friend of his who's a Moroccan refugee gets him plants for the bees, like flowers, so that she can go on the flowers, and the bee is living longer than one might think. And that seems so symbolic, the wings are broken, but she's still carrying on. Beautiful book. I can't recommend it enough. The next book, we read this in our Wednesday night book group, and we had a very interesting discussion about this, Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. The main character, Alix, is kind of an influencer, so I have an influencer up in the top right, and there's a very moving scene that takes place in a kind of a shishi yuppie supermarket. So that's my shishi yuppie supermarket over there. This is a fantastic book, in my opinion. Not everybody in the book group agreed with me, because this author really enjoys putting people into awkward situations. I think she does it beautifully. She has some coincidences in this book that I totally bought, because she had me, like, from first page, this author had me. And the book it's dealing with some serious issues. It's dealing with racial profiling, for example, but it's also got a humor and a lightness and a humanity to it that really stands out. And so even though, yes, we're dealing with some tough issues, things that happen, we have these strong characters. There's this influencer, Alix, and her babysitter, Amira. There's an incident, people are egging Alix's house, and so she calls on Amira to babysit for her daughter Briar, so she won't see the police coming to the house for the report about the egging. And when Amira gets the call, it's like 11 at night, she's at a party, she's been drinking, she's with her friends, but she comes and she takes the kid, and they go to this upscale store, and Briar likes to look at the nuts, so they're looking at the nuts, and there's this woman comes by, she's wearing like a 5K t-shirt, white woman, and smiles at Amira, so everything seems okay. And they're kind of getting down to Whitney Houston because her friend Zora is there, and Briar, and they're all having a pretty good time in the market. But then the white woman with the 5K shirt called the security guard over, and he comes over and he's like, "What are you doing here late at night? Is this your kid?" And things aren't looking good. But then she calls the girl's father, and everything sort of works out. But in the meantime, a tall young man named Kelly has taped the whole thing happening on his phone, and he's offering her, that we could use this, but she's saying no. Anyway, the book is fantastic. Lots of interesting twists and turns. I can't recommend it enough. I loved this book. I want to see more books by Kylie Reed. I'm definitely going to be reading them. And my last book is The Vixen. This is by Francine Prose, who I need to read her book, Lovers at the Chameleon Club, Paris, 1932, because apparently that's a fantastic book. This book was very, very good. It's taking place in the 1950s with the McCarthy era. We had Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. You can see them up in the top right corner. They were put to death. This is a time when the country's filled with paranoia over the communist threat and possible nuclear war. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg are accused of being spies for Russia. Supposedly Julius sent plans for weapons, although that's not clear that he really did send plans for weapons. He was working for the Russians, but it's also not clear that Ethel is guilty of anything except maybe typing up some notes. But in the meantime, they get put to death. And there's a sort of a darkly funny scene at the very beginning where our main character is with his parents, Simon, and they live in Coney Island. There's some great scenes in Coney Island where he's going on the rides too that you won't want to miss. But you know, they're watching I Love Lucy. So there's an Ethel in I Love Lucy, and then there's Ethel Rosenberg, because they keep, you know, in the old days, they would just interrupt a broadcast to bring you the news. So this is what's happening. I Love Lucy gets interrupted to talk about the Rosenbergs. And we follow Simon as he studied folklore and mythology, but he ends up getting a job in a publishing house. And there's this trashy novel called the Vixen, the Vixen, the Patriot, and the Fanatic. And it's supposedly written by this actress named Anya Partridge. And it's pretty trashy, and it's got a definite focus on the main character being, you know, she's very loosely based on Ethel Rosenberg, and that she's guilty, and that she's a vixen, and that she's a flirt. And he doesn't want to edit this book. He doesn't want to. His mother grew up in the East Side near where Ethel Rosenberg lived. So he feels like he's betraying his parents, and so he's got to make some difficult decisions about editing this book. And he makes some great decisions, and it's a really good novel, lots of twists and turns, well done, worth your time. And that is my presentation. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Louise. The Vixen is on my to read shelf, and I'd heard one amazing review of it, and one person I know really disliked it. So it's now 2-1 of people I know who liked it. So I'm glad. I personally like Francine Prose, although I haven't read that other book either that you mentioned. So I'm curious to read it. So I'll have to let you know what I think. Yeah, and everyone else's books sound great. Greg, I don't know if you know this, we actually read Murder on the Orient Express as a staff here several years ago. And it was not well liked, if I'm recalling correctly. Louise is part of that discussion. I think it was, I don't remember why exactly. I think, but it was probably one of the funnier book discussions I've ever led. People felt very strongly about that book. I think I was more shocked that people didn't know the twist. I thought that was like one of the more well-known twists in literary history, but or at least in movie history. I'd seen the Albert Finney movie as a child. So anyway, yeah, this is all great. Now comes the time we're going to talk about movies and TV that we've seen. I saw a movie which I want to discuss. First, I want to start off by apologizing first to my colleagues on this who are joining with me here. The reason for that is I'm the one who puts these discussions together, as you all may be aware, and I'm always telling them, please be concise in your presentations. We can't go longer than this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm probably going to go, I'll try to be super long, but I have many thoughts about the movie I'm going to say. So I'm apologizing ahead of time for probably droning on. So I saw Ghostbusters Afterlife, my first trip to a movie theater since December 2019, when I saw Little Women, which thank God for that, because otherwise it would have been Cats, and that's a whole other discussion. So Ghostbusters Afterlife, and I feel all the reviews I've seen this movie, I feel like you're not allowed to review it unless you give your personal relationship with Ghostbusters. So here's my personal relationship with Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters 1984, the original movie, I saw in the theater when it was first come out. Can do the math to figure out how old I am. It actually scared the living daylights out of me when I first saw it, but I rediscovered it. I was only 9. I rediscovered it a year later on home video and then on TV. So when I was 10, I guess Stay Puft Marshmallow Man stopped being scary at that point, and I fell madly in love with this movie. It's still one of my favorite movies. I could quote every line to you. I'm one of those annoying people. People hate watching it with me because I will say all the lines first. I have to say for a long time, I was quoting the edited for TV version, which has a little bit less swearing than the original one. So certain lines I memorized wrong, but I was obsessed. Janine Melnitz, Annie Potts, best movie secretary ever. She says the best line about her job, which I won't repeat. I love my job, by the way, but she's just amazing. Annie Potts all the way. And I just say Ernie Hudson as Winston Zeddemore, also awesome. He gets some of the best lines. I just say Janine and Winston, 2 of the most underrated characters in 1980s cinema. So anyway, fast forward to 1989, Ghostbusters 2 comes out. I kid you not, I almost considered missing my 8th grade graduation to go to opening night of that movie. I went the next day instead, and boy, did I hate that movie. It was probably the most disappointing night I've ever had in a movie theater. Phantom Menace can thank Ghostbusters 2 because that would have been number 1. But I just, whatever. It was a movie, Ghostbusters 2. I just didn't think it was that funny. I thought the first movie is just so funny. The reboot, Ghostbusters 2016, I actually, hot take, kind of liked it. Was it a great movie? No, it wasn't the best, but I thought it was amusing. And also, I have no problem with women being Ghostbusters. I felt a lot of the narrative surrounding people who are so upset about that movie really bothered me, what people were upset about it. And personally, I thought a reboot was actually better than doing another sequel. So fast forward to Ghostbusters Afterlife. Why did you see it, Laura? You're asking. Clearly, after what happened in Ghostbusters 2, am I a bit of a masochist? Maybe. Also, I was just very curious, and I was on vacation the week it came out. So I decided weekday, safe time to go to the movie theater. And I did feel very safe, by the way. Everyone wore masks, not very crowded. So all that being said, now that you know my obsession with Ghostbusters, it was a movie. Yes, it was. The pros, it was well acted, I guess well directed. It was just kind of boring, frankly. And it also was not all that funny, and not because in the way Ghostbusters 2 wasn't funny. Ghostbusters 2 was a comedy. I recognize that was a comedy. I just didn't like all the humor in it. Ghostbusters Afterlife is actually not a comedy. Why? Why? And it's also not that scary. Granted, I'm in my 40s, so maybe it's just as scary as the original one, and I'm at this point, that stuff doesn't bother me. For those, just real quick summary of it, basically it's about the estranged family of Ghostbuster Egon Spangler, played by the late and great Harold Ramis, and really much how they come to terms with their connection to him and the Ghostbusters. His granddaughter, played by McKenna Grace, she's great in this movie. But she does a good job basically being like a little Spangler. It's all well and good. It's very heartwarming. It's a coming of age film. It makes you think. Do you know what Ghostbusters, the original movie, did not do? It was not heartwarming. It did not make you think. It was not a coming of age film. Ghostbusters, the original one, works because it is a silly movie about a very scary topic. I'm going to quote, steal a line from my colleague Greg, because he and I have had many discussions about Ghostbusters. It was lightning in a bottle. It was a happy accident. It was co-written by Harold Ramis, who did an amazing job. Groundhog Day, it's like such a great movie, one of his movies. they did him dirty in this too by making him an estranged father. I'm sorry. I don't know why they did that to his character. I know it was supposed to be a feel-good. There are some, spoiler alert, there are some cameos from the original cast, pretty much all the surviving original cast who still acts. So sadly, no Rick Moranis. Janine is in it, Annie Potts, not enough. So are Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray are there. Honestly, it just let me go home and watch the original movie. Is it a horrible movie? No. I'm not sure why it exists. And I can't help but think, there's an uneasy part of me that thinks it's supposed to negate the 2016 reboot, and that I find that a little upsetting as well, even though that wasn't a great movie either. I'm not denying that, but I feel like some people are just so, and this is sort of like the toxic side of fandoms, I feel like people were so enraged by that movie even existing that they felt they had to do this. And it's okay to let franchises die. It's okay. I do have to say, just as I mentioned this earlier, there was a preview for Scream 4 coming out, and I saw that preview and actually muttered to myself, another Scream movie, a fourth Scream movie. Who would pay money to see that? As I sat there in a pandemic, in a movie theater, having paid money to see the fourth Ghostbusters movie. So I am a hypocrite. I could literally go on an hour about this, but I will knock it off now because I feel very strongly about Ghostbusters. Although, just word of advice, remember, if someone asks you if you are a god, you say yes. Just remember that. That's a line from Ghostbusters. Louise, I think no one else here has seen this movie, so I will stop talking, and I think Louise wanted to talk about something after my own heart as well. So go ahead.
That was great to hear. I loved the original Ghostbusters movie. I absolutely loved it. I saw it in the movie theater as well. It was great to hear that. Yeah, I agree 100%. I love Bill Murray too, by the way. This is very retro. And I injured my knee. Why is that relevant? Well, because I had to rest, ice, compress, elevate. And what better way to do that than by watching the entire if you will, of the Mary Tyler Moore show. Oh my God, it was so fun. I don't know if Laura, if I told you this, but I had never seen the last episode, the finale. I knew what happened, but I had never seen it. And so I felt this sense of closure and completeness because now I've seen every single episode, and I think the show really holds up. It's interesting how much drinking goes on in the show. Like Lou Grant is constantly drinking. I mean, he's like an alcoholic or something. So that was kind of funny, but he's such a great character. All the characters are so great. Mary Tyler Moore, Valerie Harper is Rhoda. It's Ted Knight, of course, Ted Baxter, Georgine Kemple maybe played Georgette, and of course Betty
Georgia
White.
Engel, yeah.
Yeah,
Georgia Engel played
Georgia Engel, thank you. And then Betty White as Suzanne Kemple, the happy homemaker, hilarious. I think this is worth seeing, even if you've never seen it. I think it holds up. It's kind of fun to watch people using typewriters and not computers, and there are no cell phones. In the office, there's just the one phone on Mary's desk, and everybody has to use it, and that's kind of hilarious nowadays. And it's just such a good comedy ensemble. The group chemistry is wonderful. Oh, and Murray, Gavin McLeod, of course, playing Murray, the writer. It's hilarious. You can get it on YouTube. You can get the whole thing on YouTube, and very well filmed, like not with crappy commercials every 2 seconds or anything like that. And the only other thing I want to say is during Rest, Ice, Compress, Elevate, I was reviewing The Golden Girls also, and I love that show. I think the humor really holds up. I love Bea Arthur so much that I can't even tell you. They're all great though. They're all great. Bea Arthur's my favorite in the show, with her playing Dorothy. And just a personal story that when I had a baby and I was home on maternity leave, here's what happened to me. Every day at 5, I'd be like, yes, the Golden Girls are on. I'd be holding this baby, watching the Golden Girls. It was literally the highlight of my day, and I'm not kidding you. And with that, I will pass on to the next person.
There is a link, of course, between the Golden Girls and Mary Tyler Moore, and that's Sue Ann Nivens, aka Rose Nyland, aka Betty White. the only surviving member of either cast at this point, because sadly this year we lost Cloris Leachman, Ed Asner, and Gavin McLeod, who's also on Love Boat, by the way. I do have to ask, did you see Ted Baxter's Famous Broadcaster School? That is my absolute favorite episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
I did, and that is a hilarious episode. Oh my God, with their audience of one. It's hilarious. Yes, that's a good, and of course the Chuckles the Clown classic
so
episode is just fantastic.
It's so hard to stop at one peanut, as they say. Okay, Liz, I think you want to share.
Hi, yeah. So my thing I'm going to talk about is like radically different from the Golden Girls and the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I recently watched the 3-part documentary series, The Curse of Von Dutch, on Hulu. So Von Dutch was a very, it was also kind of a lightning in a bottle moment. It was a fashion brand in the early 2000s. So picture it, it's 2001. I'm a sophomore in high school. And I am incredibly goth, like so embarrassingly goth that I wish I'd brought a picture. So the Von Dutch brand was like the opposite of that. It was very like California, like with the trucker hats and like super low-rise jeans, and everyone was really tan and cool. And then I was just like this pale little like worm of a person wearing like a 9 Inch Nails t-shirt. Anyways, I did not identify with the Von Dutch branding at all when it was out around. And the documentary is about how it has a bonkers history. And I feel like all the people they interview for it, like none of them are reliable narrators. And you sort of come out of it being like, I have no idea what happened, but it is such a train wreck that it's just like, give me more. I want more. So if you're interested in the history of fashion, early 2000s nostalgia, fashion trends that quickly became jokes, anything Paris Hilton has been involved with, true crime, or I don't know how, you should watch this if you want. And if not, don't. But I enjoyed it just as like mindless brain candy about something that I was never into that now I can laugh at.
Thank you. I'm intrigued. I definitely want to watch. Very different, yes, than Mary Tyler Moore and Golden Girls or any of Saturday Night Live alum oeuvre as Ghostbusters. But sounds awesome. Greg, I think you have something you want to share.
Yeah, so I won't be too long. So, with my rant of the Wheel of Time, the reason why I started trying to read that book series is I actually started watching the television series, The Wheel of Time, which is on Prime right now. It's an entertaining show. There's a lot of things that are going for it. There is, for starters, it's gorgeous. Like it looks like something right out of a fantasy novel. Pretty stunning. The acting is I think the acting is at its best very good, at its worst not awful, passable. And also the cast is also very ethnically diverse and also very what's the word? Also diverse when it comes to telling different stories between men and women. So I love me the Lord of the Rings, but that it didn't have too much of that. So that was very, very refreshing. And it had some really, really well done monsters. I love me some cool monsters. I get really bummed when they're not really well, when they don't do a good job, but when the first monster comes out of nowhere or there's an attack, you're like, whoa, that guy's gnarly. Oh, he looks like he can do some damage. And it was a lot of fun there. The cons is that it does, in my opinion, at the very least, these episodes take very, very much influence to the Lord of the Rings, to the point where you do kind of roll your eyes at some points. Like there are riders cloaked in black coming after the protagonist in their small town, which You've seen that before. They get chased and they have to escape on a river ferry. You've seen that before. The bad guys, like, they're called Trollocs, which is when you take the word troll and orc and put it together, and it's just like, come on, dude. And then finally, and I feel like this is a good warning, and this is very frustrating for me, all kidding aside, there is a scene where they kill off a female character rather suddenly to further promote or motivate a male protagonist's storyline, which I think is very frustrating. I think it's very cheap, and it felt very cheap in it. And I later found out that this scene didn't even exist in the books. So it's like, what are you doing, guys? It's like, seriously, and honestly, the only reason I feel like the only reason why, like, that was such a frustrating scene for me, that the only reason I did not stop watching the show is there are several female characters in here who do have very strong personalities, very strong motivations. So it's not like the one lady character just got killed off, but still, it's definitely not great. And I could understand why people would be pretty ticked about it. So 7 out of 10. It's entertaining, and if it could go one way or the other, but I had fun. So yep.
I think there's a trope, I think, right? When is it called putting women in the refrigerator or fridging?
Women in the refrigerator, yep.
And that's definitely a problematic trope,
Yeah.
definitely. So that's too bad. I am very curious about that show. I see ads for it all the time when I watch something on Prime. So
Oh yeah.
You have not dissuaded me from checking it out, certainly.
Fair enough.
Amber, I think you had a movie you wanted to share. Is that right?
I was going to talk about 2 movies that I've seen recently, but I feel like I should say that, well, I don't know whether I should say this or not, but I watched, given that you and I are the same age, Laura, I watched Ghostbusters for the first time, and I'm an 80s queen. I hadn't seen it until like last month. We watched it right before Halloween. Was the first time I'd ever seen it. I watched it with the kids. I'll stop there with what I'm going to say about that. And then you said who wants to watch Scream?
That's fine.
Well, I think I would have liked it more if I had seen it when I was, when it came out. I think that it just didn't. And watching it with, kids now that just were like, what? So, but.
I
And
think
then
nostalgia,
Scream,
definitely.
yes, totally. I recently, over the weekend, watched the first Scream because I'm getting ready for Scream 4 to come out. And it's funny, apparently my sister was in town, and apparently we used to watch the Scream movies all the time. And she couldn't believe I didn't remember who the killers were in the first one. I didn't. It was like watching it for the first time. So it made me feel incredibly old that, it wasn't that long ago and there were no cell phones, and the whole premise really wouldn't work today with the technology that we have. But anyway, so I'll stop there.
I just wanted to add on, Amber, that it's funny that you mentioned that you hadn't seen Ghostbusters for the first time, because I have actually only seen like Scream this year. And I love horror, but I just never saw it. And my wife, Maggie, who's a big like 80s, 90s nostalgia nerd, she doesn't like horror, but she's a huge fan of that. She's like, you got to watch this because it is something, this epitomizes that. So.
Did you like it?
I did. I thought it was, it explains a lot, because I feel like there's a lot of like horror movies and tropes that I missed by not seeing this movie. And I'm like, oh, so that's where this comes from. This is really neat. So it was kind of like a light bulb went up in my head. Also, the serial killers are kind of like the Mr. Bean of slashers, because so much stuff happens to them. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I have to say, as much as I sort of like made fun of the fact there's a 4th one, and I groaned when I saw the trailer, I did actually like the original Scream, because it is, and I do not like slasher movies. I hate it. Like, they were huge when we were kids, right, Amber? And like I remember having a summer party on Halloween and rented either one of the Nightmare on Elm Streets or Friday the 13th. And I actually, I left the room when my friends watched it. Like I got it for their benefit, but then I went and did something else. But I really like Scream because I do think it's a great send up of those films. I think with me, I just, by the time they did the third one, I was like, all right, like I thought the joke went on. But I am curious, like since you mentioned the technology, I am actually, that makes me a little bit more curious to see the new one because you're right, like it's so much of what, at least the first couple, and actually now that I think about it, I don't know if I saw the third one, I definitely saw the first two. So much that is dependent on the how, like there's one scene in one of the movies where she goes out of the house with the cordless phone and she loses reception. Spoiler alert, I guess, but where that wouldn't be a thing now. So yeah, so maybe I'm feeling a little bit more generous, and definitely that's totally fine. You don't like Ghostbusters or wasn't as thrilled with it. I think a lot of those movies are definitely nostalgia. I know we've discussed John Hughes movies on this before, and there were some I did not see when I was a kid, like The Breakfast Club. I didn't see until I was an adult, and like I don't get it with that movie, even though I was the generation of that movie, and I think it's because I didn't see it till I was an adult. So I think there's a big factor in that. I definitely recognize that with some of my favorites from the 80s. So yeah, so no apology necessary or needed. So yeah, any other final thoughts about what anyone else has said, or any other movies or TV shows quickly you want to give a shout out to that you enjoyed or didn't enjoy? I also real quickly, I saw Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings and the Legend of the Ten Rings, not the latest Marvel movie, but the second latest, and I really enjoyed that. I definitely recommend it. It's on Disney Plus without a fee, which you can actually get from one of our Rokus at the library. For those who don't have subscribe to Disney Plus, very fun, and it doesn't. You don't have to have knowledge of either the comic book character. In fact, from what I understand, it's actually very different than the comic book origin of the character, as well as I think it's actually okay if you don't even know the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is, I think I liked it, even though I have seen most of the other Marvel movies. I liked that it was actually could work as a standalone story. Marvel, I think I'm getting a little burnt out from Marvel, even though I watch everything. I'm watching Hawkeye, it's there partly, but anyway, yeah. So yeah, without any further thoughts, we thank you all for joining us. One thing I forgot to mention at the top, as always, we thank our friends of the library for supporting us. They sponsor so many programs. They make the professional Zoom for when we do live streaming. We can only do that with a professional Zoom account, and as well as so many of our programs. A lot of you who enjoy our children's programs, that would not be possible without the friends of the library. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel so you get notifications of videos, and we will see you next month. We hope you'll join Amber this Saturday to discuss Nothing to See Here, right? Was that the title? And as well as join us Monday to tell us what you're reading. Until then, have a safe and happy holiday season, and yeah, that's it. So in the words of one of the Ghostbusters co-stars, good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.